So I'm very pleased to have on the sofa Brenda Prince on the far side and Maggie Murray. In fact, Brenda has some images in the current miners' strike show, but I'm curious to talk to you both. So to my knowledge, I think you started out doing a photography degree. Did you do it at the same place, or and where did you do it, and how was it?
I did mine at the Polytechnic of Central London, which is what it was called then. It's the University of Westminster now. Actually, that's where I met Maggie. She was one of the tutors. Do you want to say that?
Yes, well, I trained previously when it was Regent Street Polytechnic. That's where I trained as a photographer.
Okay, so did you go to that college and then started teaching in another college? Was it the same?
No, it was the same. I did teach at other places, but I taught only ever part-time, mainly at Westminster.
And what kind of work did they encourage you to do in these college days?
Oh, when I was there, I learnt how to spot glass negatives, for example, all sorts of things like that. But it was very good on lighting and things like that. We learnt very, very basic lighting with big lamps and everything. And we learnt how to print and copy. And I don't think I was allowed to put my hands on a 35mm camera till the end of the second year.
That's astonishing, isn't it? And was there any sort of knowledge of or interest in photojournalism back in those days?
There was, and they had one person who taught it, but you didn't get any of that until the second year.
Mm-hmm. And then would they set you projects?
Yes.
Such as?
The first project I ever did was to go down to Buckingham Palace and photograph the guards and changing of the guards and to try and make something different out of that. But actually I did do that, but I also went out to a cafe and sat there and for the first time in my life took pictures of people without them knowing their pictures were being taken.
Mm-hmm. And then when you both left, well, you were still teaching, Maggie, but
Yes.
when you left, Brenda, was it your idea to become a freelance photojournalist?
Yes, it was. I hadn't really thought it through, but I just wanted to do photography. And one of the projects I did while I was at college was on homelessness. And I took photographs in a
shelter?
A shelter. Yeah. I've got a terrible memory. But I never remember thinking I'm going to be a photojournalist, but it was I wanted to do documentary photography. I was a big fan of who's the guy?
Don McCullum.
Don McCullum, yeah. Mm. I didn't want to be Don McCullum, but I liked the idea of documenting people's lives and travelling.
And did that generate an income for you, or was it just purely something you were doing almost on the side?
It didn't at first, of course not. But I got a job a part-time job in a community darkroom in North Paddington, working with Philip Walmouth. And so I started, one of the first projects I did there was, it was an exhibition called Jobs for the Girls, because I wanted to document women doing non-traditional work. I would have got paid a wage for being at the community darkroom because we had every year we had to apply for money. The very, very first picture I ever had published, I didn't get paid for. It was in spare rib. But and then gradually, when I joined Format, which was a year later, wasn't it? Mm. And then I started getting more money, more picture usages. But I didn't teach, if that's what you mean.
Okay. And Maggie, you're one of the founders of Format, which started, I believe, in 1983.
Yes, 82, really.
82,
yeah.
Okay. And who else was involved in the founding of it?
Well, it came out of a conversation that Val Wilmer, the photographer that I had, after we'd been to yet another opening of an agency. In the 1980s, you probably remember, lots of agencies started opening. And we went to an opening, and it was very nice and everything, but it was all men. And people we knew very well, and so we came out of there, had a few drinks, and said, nobody's going to invite us to be in an agency. If we want an organisation like this, we're going to have to set it up ourselves.
Which you did, of course.
Which we did.
And then did you start to recruit other female photographers?
We did. We then started talking to everyone we knew, and people were suggested. And in the beginning, the main members were Joanne O'Brien, Pam Isherwood, Jenny Matthews, Sheila Gray, Anita Corbin was in at the beginning. So a group of 8 of us then started meeting seriously and finding premises and getting started.
And did you employ someone to look after all this sort of payments and getting commissions and such like?
In the beginning, we had one person working in the office, and the photographers for the first year or 2 years, I think, donated a day a week usually to work in the office and do the everyday admin and it was an office in a very noisy building on the Holloway Road in Islington. We eventually moved out of that somewhere else, but it was.
And did you form yourself as a cooperative in the way that, say, Magnum had?
I'm not quite sure how Magnum operated, but yes, we were cooperative in that we all worked together, but we didn't. It wasn't a cooperative in that all the money went into one pot, but everyone paid the same percentage of whatever pictures were sold, or a different percentage for commissions.
Okay.
And we had weekly meetings where decisions were taken.
Right. And was it quite successful? Did you manage to get work?
We
did the industry view you? Was it welcomed, or was it sort of looked at with certain suspicion?
Oh, it's both.
Yeah, I was going to say at first suspicion, but then when they saw the product and they saw the work we were covering, that a lot of other people weren't, then they came to us for all sorts of things, didn't they?
It's also
mostly women.
Yeah, it's also very interesting who supported us and who didn't when we look back. And I have to say that the GLC were wonderful, not because that was the Greater London Council at the time.
Yes.
Not because they gave us grants or anything. They did give us a small grant, I seem to remember, but they commissioned us. And, that's much more important than getting a grant in many ways.
Because then you have the images from that
You
commission.
have the images if you negotiate it with people, but you also do the work, and it's a different way of working. It's important. I mean, you must feel that as well, rather than having a grant that you have to produce for. Somehow working for it yourself is different.
Yeah. So Brenda, you say you were photographing the things that other people didn't. Tell us more about that sort of work that you and Format were up to.
Well, I got invited into Format by Val Wilmer, who had heard about my women and manual trades work and women doing non-traditional work.
And also the exhibition that you'd done at the Poly.
Yeah, of course. I did an exhibition. Well, it wasn't an exhibition at the time, but it was the work I was doing for the Poly was on lesbian mothers and their children, because lots of lesbian mothers were losing custody of their children. So I decided that was going to be a project I would focus on. But thinking about why they would come to Format rather than, say, I don't know,
Network or something.
Network comes to mind. Yeah, I actually worked at Network for a year doing the filing because they knew that we would have the woman's aspect of whatever the subject was.
Or we would choose different subjects that other people weren't interested in. Mm-hmm. We tried to cover things which other people didn't have such an interest in. Like, then she mentioned lesbians and gays, people with disabilities, black people.
That's right.
And anybody who didn't normally appear
or who felt were misrepresented,
or they were misrepresented.
Mm-hmm.
We spent a lot of time in meetings discussing representation, but not in a sort of academic way. You know, what should we be photographing homeless people or not?
Mm-hmm. And what was the answer to that question?
Well, in the beginning, it was not, because it was you know, it was terrible. But then it became such a feature of life, we couldn't overlook it. We had to record it. So we were always having discussions.
Ask people though.
Yes. Yes.
Or it would be for somebody, like the exhibition I did on the night shelters was a fundraising thing. So everybody knew why I was there and what I was doing. So
I suppose you specialise in sort of community activities and also, you know, taking photographs on the domestic front, which maybe the men hadn't really appreciated how important that was.
There was a certain amount of that, although I probably worked more abroad than I did in Britain, but some of the photographers did the opposite. And I suppose what we always looked for for some of us, for the woman's point of view, or the actual women. I remember in Africa, when I was on one of my trips to Africa, the person who was showing me around, who was a woman, said, "I'm just going to tell you something. Whichever village I go to, I always ask to speak to some of the women." And I suppose we did something similar. And in that way, we always had something different to offer. If someone rang up for a photograph of a plumber, we would send them a woman plumber.
Right, very good. And was the Hackney Flashers project within the Times of format, or had that come before?
That came before. I was in the Hackney Flashers with a whole group of people, including Joe Spence, Michael Ann Mullen, Christine Rhodes. That came before. But the experience of working collectively appealed to me. I enjoy that. So I think that fed into setting up format as well.
And I know format it disbanded in 2003. Do you think it did that because the market was changing insofar that there weren't the sort of grants from people like the GLC, or indeed the editorial market was in decline at that point?
I don't think it was to do with the grants. I think it was the decline of the market, the changes in the market, but also the financing and the fact that digital had come in. Because if we'd wanted to keep up as an agency, we would have had to have made a huge investment in digitising everything. And indeed, all the photographers would have to buy digital cameras, which, I mean, they're expensive now, but they were certainly very, very expensive for people then. And it's a different way of working. Some people didn't necessarily want to work like that. I mean, you
I didn't. No, I dropped out then, didn't I? I left format. I'd done 20 years or whatever it was. But to be honest, I couldn't, afford to shell out, 9,000 quid on a new camera, or a couple of cameras it would have been, and scanning equipment. I know Joanne O'Brien, I remember her spending a fortune on getting all the gear and everything. Well, it's paid off for her because she's still working, but I just thought, do I really want to? And I was in my 40s then. I know that's not very old, but I sort of wanted to, work in the way I had been and not have to be sending images down the wire sort of.
But I'm sure now you use a digital camera, or you started to.
No, I don't.
Oh, really?
No, I don't have a proper professional camera now. I did retire from photography 20 years ago. So
was that coinciding with the time that format had come to an end?
More or less. I left in 2001.
Yeah, a year before, I think. Yes.
Yeah, you wound it up in 2003, didn't you?
Yes.
So, I gave you plenty of notice, didn't I? But
oh yes.
I was doing. What happened to me was I was doing a project again about homelessness, and I was documenting people in a night shelter, emergency night shelter in East London, and I've never been somebody to go in and just snap people and leave. I sat and talked to lots of people while I was there, and they become more comfortable. And when I used to go a couple of times a month to photograph them, And one of he was a minister in, I can't remember the church now, but anyway, said, you're very good at listening. You should consider doing that as a career. And I thought, what a good idea, because I put my cameras on
so
one
did
side.
you think about training as a psychotherapist?
I did, and that's what I did.
Oh, it was, all right.
So I started off training as a counsellor, then I did a 4-year training as a psychotherapist, and so I've retired from that now. I stopped doing that about 4 years ago. So the two things for me were very connected, because I was always interested in people's stories.
And during your time at Format, you did, of course, do the work on the miners' strike, and particularly looking at the women's role within that.
Yes.
Was that something that was commissioned, or was that something you just chose to do?
I chose to do that. That came out of my own sort of personal politics, if you like. I was brought up by working class parents. I'm a working class woman, and it seemed to me a real fight. They had a fight on their hands with Thatcher and the government, and I just thought, I'm a great admirer of John Sturrock and John Harris, and I liked the work they were doing, but I didn't see many women, so I made the decision, didn't I, to go and focus on what the women were doing, because I think they kept the strike going longer, because they were so courageous. They were fundraising. They were on the picket lines. They were going to meetings. It was fantastic what the women were doing, actually.
And did you work in many different mining areas, or did you tend to specialise in just one?
It was just Nottingham, and I think the main reason for that was that Racer was already working in
That's
Yorkshire.
Racer Page.
Racer Page was working in Yorkshire, in South Yorkshire. But my brother also happened to live in Nottingham, so it made it very easy for me to stay up there and then travel out to the various collieries and go to the meetings up there and things.
Were you able to get the work published at the time, or were you literally accumulating this set of pictures which eventually got shown in that Photographers Gallery exhibition?
Yes, I did get... I think the trade unions used a lot of my pictures before I was commissioned to do the Photographers Gallery. So when they commissioned Racer and I and Imogen Young, and there was another woman whose name I've forgotten, Isabel, we'd already been working for about 6 or 7 months when they decided to commission us. But a lot of the trade unions used my work, and Racer.
Yeah.
So when, in 2003, there was an exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery of Format photographers, was this in a way of sort of summing up the time there and giving people a chance to see what you'd achieved?
I don't know if that's why they chose us, but it was a chance for us to make a mark, because none of us realise how quickly anybody can disappear once they've closed, or their business has closed, or their organisation. But it was Michael Ann Mullen, who's an associate member, said, Maggie, if you don't do something about it, Format will be forgotten in 5 years, and the pictures will all disappear. You need to be in a national institution. I'm going to introduce you to somebody. And it came out of that. And none of us ever none of the people I knew really thought about the importance of archives, books, because you can completely disappear. When I was a student at the Polytechnic in the early 60s, I never heard of Grace Robertson, who was working for Picture Post only 5 years previously. She was then rediscovered.
Yes, it is astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. People just disappear. Look at Lee Miller.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a revival of interest in
exactly. It takes 20, 30, 50 years. Fascinating. Yeah. But
so the Format archive has gone to Bishopsgate Institute. Was that your chosen place for the archive to be held?
Yes, it was. Yes. I knew about it because the Hackney Flashers put their work there. And we suddenly thought, well, maybe we should put Format's work in an archive. And we did look at other archives. We looked at other archives of women's or feminist work, because that might have suited us better. But what we liked about Bishopsgate was its accessibility. And if you go there now, it is amazing how many researchers there are. And that ranges from local people doing their family research to the Tate and the Barbican and people like that. It is an amazing place.
And have they created an inventory of the Format work there?
Yes, they have.
And is it all held in acid-free?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So anyone can phone up, make an appointment, and go in and see anything they particularly like to research.
You can. What I find really important is there is an inventory of all the pictures. There are no images. You can't, as I've heard people ask them often, couldn't I just do it online and have you send it to me? No, you have to go in there and sit down and do the research.
Yeah, very good. And here we are 20 years later since Format ended, and now we have Women in Revolt at Tate Britain. It's as if now there is a true appreciation of what Format achieved. Do you feel sort of vindicated with this resurgence of interest?
I don't know about vindicated, but it's wonderful.
It's nice to have the interest, sure.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think we were quite well respected when we were, up and running. We'd have so many bikers coming and picking up pictures and, I always remember thinking it was strange that The Economist used to use us quite a lot. But they did, didn't they, weekly?
Oh, it was very, we'd have spare rib coming in, and then the bike would arrive, you're right, the bike would arrive from The Economist. I suppose what we didn't have enough of was really high-level commissions. We could have done with more high-level commissions, I think. Now we're in the Tate, and although we never considered ourselves artists, that's a whole discussion for another time. It's very good to get that recognition.
Yeah.
And for women in general, because so many people are being rediscovered. They find what they've got in their own archives, lots of institutions that they've had for hundreds of years sometimes and not really valued. Okay.
Well, very nice to speak to you. And Brenda, you have some coal mining strike pictures in our current show.
Yes,
from the commission. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for asking us, as they say these days.